Hi, I'm Ellie Cowan, Director of Engagement here at Preservation Maryland, the statewide historic preservation organization. And I'm joined by Nick Redding, our Executive Director here. And we're going to tell you a little bit about the Federal Historic Tax Credit Program, which is currently under fire here. So Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about the program?
So the program is pretty much the best tool that historic preservation communities all across the country, and especially here in Maryland, have at their disposal. It has invested more in our historic buildings than pretty much any other tool in the federal arsenal. And it's really one of the best tax credit programs across the board for community redevelopment, revitalization work. So it's created back in 1977. It's a 20% tax credit on the qualified rehab expenditures on a historic structure. And in layman terms, what that means is, let's say you have $1 million project, and that would be a $200,000 tax credit. What that does is it makes historic buildings just as interesting from a development standpoint as, say, building something new. So it is sort of the difference that allows historic structures to be really something that developers can take on. It allows us to rehab historic places, but in turn, it is a tool that is used to redevelop and revitalize historic communities. It's done a tremendous amount of work since the 1970s. It's created something like 2.3 million jobs. It's rehabilitated 41,000 structures around the country. It really is the single best tool we have. Here in Baltimore, where we're located, and all across the state from Frederick to the Eastern Shore, there are numerous examples of where this program has really not only rehabbed structures and saved important historic places and important historic architecture, but has also really catalyzed historic communities and given new life to historic places. So you go to downtown Frederick. But for the Historic Tax Credit Program, downtown Frederick would not look the way it looks today. You go to some of the best buildings in Baltimore City, some of these iconic structures, 10 Light, that was just recently redone, bringing new residential life back to downtown. That's the Federal Historic Tax Credit.
It's really a community revitalization tool at the end of the day. So what's happening with the tax credit program now? Why are we talking about this?
Right, well, as you may have heard, we are engaging in discussions about tax reform at the national level. And that tax reform discussion is touching every aspect of the tax code. And unfortunately, it's also touching the Federal Historic Tax Credit. It's one of those tax credits in the code. And what we've recently learned is that the House Ways and Means Committee, which is taking up the work, has decided to only retain 2 tax credits. The low-income housing tax credit, which is fantastic, and it works very well with the historic tax credit, actually, and the research and development tax credit. And but for that, we aren't seeing the retention of any of these tax credits. And so in practice, what that means in non-Congress terms is we won't have the Federal Historic Tax Credit if the bill as currently written moves forward.
Okay. So is there anything that can still be done to prevent this program from being cut?
Well, yeah, and let's also take a step back and talk about what might happen if we were to lose this credit. So we've talked about all the good that it does, but you can think about communities all across the state, and there are projects in the works right now that are depending on this, and all of their financing is built off of this. If we lose this tax credit, which has been with us since the 1970s, we are going to see a cataclysmic impact on historic preservation, not only here in Maryland, but all across the country. And it's going to disproportionately hit communities that have already been hard hit, places that have been disinvested. In the past fiscal year, the Federal Historic Tax Credit, 1 in 5 projects has been used for affordable housing. So we're not talking about restoring big fancy places, although sometimes the architecture is fantastic. We are talking about losing a credit that is really solving one of the biggest challenges of community development right now, affordable housing. So what could potentially happen if we lose this is that the preservation work that we know of and modern preservation of the last 25, 30 years comes grinding to a halt. And I can't underscore how dangerous and how devastating this will be to historic preservation efforts. And the other thing I would throw out too, talking about this credit and why we should retain it, and everybody thinks that their credit should be retained, of course, but I will challenge you to find a tax credit program that pays more back into the Treasury than it ever takes out. So for every dollar that the federal government invests in this program, the federal government gets back $1.20 with the return on investment, the economic impact that this credit creates. You know, historic preservation creates more jobs than new construction. It creates better paid jobs than new construction. And so the return is fantastic. And then of course, at the local level, places like Baltimore, Frederick, Cambridge, whoever is benefiting from these projects, the value of the property goes up. And so the tax rolls go up, the property taxes go up. And as a result, we have better schools, better roads, better healthcare, all those sorts of things. So preservation plays a critical role in this. And when you take that one piece out, the whole thing kind of falls apart. So we are very scared about this. But to Ellie's question about what can you do, we are not without action at this point. So there's a link in this video, and you can click on that link from our partners at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and that'll take you to a letter that you can pre-populate and send to your member of Congress. And let them know that this is critical. So here in Maryland, we have really great support. Senator Cardin has sponsored legislation called the Historic Tax Credit Improvement Act of 2017 that would not only retain the tax credit, but would make it even better. We'd love to see something like that included. And I think it's incumbent upon Congress to identify those tax credits that aren't working and yeah, maybe get rid of some. But to find the ones that are working and not just say we're going to keep them, but let's make them work even better. And that's the opportunity we have right now with the tax credit. It is dire, it is scary, but with enough action and enough voices, we can turn the situation around. And here in Maryland, we need our legislators to reach out to their friends on Ways and Means and to tell them it has to be included. So what's going to happen next, sort of the next steps here, is that we expect on November 1st that there will be an actual bill text released. We presume and expect at this moment that the historic tax credit will not be in there. There may be only a few days. We're hearing maybe 3-4 days to amend the bill. And so we have to have friends of preservation out there, both Republican and Democrat. It's not a partisan issue, making sure that this program is preserved and retained. Because the stakes are just really high, and I can't underscore that enough. So we've called on our members and supporters in the past to get involved. Just this past
rousing success.
Yeah, just this past Labor Day, we beat back an effort here in Maryland that would have stripped preservation grant funding, and we were able to turn the tide on that.
Our voices were heard. So.
Right, and you were not without the ability to get involved on this. So we're asking that our members share this video, make sure you click on that link, and also help us with our advocacy efforts. So there's a donate button there. If you're so inclined and you care about these issues, you care about the future of preservation, both here in Maryland and beyond, help us out with that. We have an advocacy fund that helps us get involved in issues like this, both in Annapolis and in Washington, D.C. So with that, thank you for your time. Thank you for all of your support. And we really hope that we can count on you to help us protect not only the best of Maryland, but the best of this nation.